but just enough. All right. So in chapter 17 is all about contrast harmonics, okay? And for contrast harmonics, you have tissue harmonics and you have contrast harmonics. So those are the two categories, tissue harmonics. Okay, so for tissue harmonics, you have what they call a fundamental frequency and then a harmonic frequency. So these are the two terms you have to first introduce yourself with. The fundamental frequency is your transmitted frequency. Okay, this is what goes out into the body, your transducer frequency. Your harmonic frequency is what is then converted when you turn on tissue harmonics. So tissue harmonics has to be turned on. It has to be activated in order for this to start happening. Okay. If you don't turn it on, it's just fundamental frequencies, whatever the transmitted frequency is. So tissue harmonics is something that you have to activate in order for the machine to then start working its magic. And your harmonic frequency, it is 2 times your fundamental frequency. Okay, so it just doubles. It doubles whatever your frequency is. And when we spoke about axial resolution, remember I brought up tissue harmonics because tissue harmonics affects your frequency, and then frequency affects your wavelength, wavelength affects your SPL, SPL affects your axial value affects your axial resolution. So what are the little things that you should know about harmonic frequencies or tissue harmonics? Well, just little fun facts here and there, okay? It is a nonlinear behavior, okay? So it's not really predictable. That's all they want you to know. You don't have to really go into understanding more about this. Just understand that it is a nonlinear behavior. The way that the wave works is nonlinear, okay? But if you really want to go into it, um, uh, coincidentally, we mentioned rare fractions. The wave travels differently during the phase of rare fraction than during the phase of compression. It travels differently at different speeds. And because of that, it's unpredictable, so they call it nonlinear. So that's really the reason why they call it nonlinear. Not that you have to really know anything more about that, okay? So for tissue harmonics, it is nonlinear, it doubles your frequency, and it is created by these two guys, pulse inversion and power modulation. I'm not really sure if you have to know how each of these works. I wouldn't say so, but I wouldn't be surprised if they ask you about these terms. Okay, harmonics is a small part of the exam, so if you're asked about this, theoretically it should be about 1 or 2 questions. Theoretically, okay. So you have pulse inversion and power modulation. Now for pulse inversion, if I'm not mistaken, pulse inversion is going to send out 2 waves that are going to be experiencing destructive interference. So you notice that these 2 waves are opposites. Okay, so they actually cancel each other out. So these two, that's the way that pulse inversion works. Sends out these 2 waves, they cancel out, and whatever is left over is your harmonic frequency. And that's how the machine sort of isolates the transmitted frequency, which are these 2 opposite waves. It isolates that and keeps the harmonic frequency for your imaging. So that's pulse inversion. Okay, so it just sends out 2 pulses and they experience destructive interference. Okay, in the very, very beginning of the book, you have constructive interference and destructive interference. So this is when they just cancel each other out. For power modulation, they actually send out 2 pulses, but they're the same. Okay, so instead of experiencing destructive interference, they'll actually experience constructive interference. So they'll get bigger. They'll combine and double. then the machine just takes that and just cancels it out. Just a different way of achieving this in order to isolate the harmonic frequency. So these are the two technologies behind tissue harmonics. You'll notice that in both of these, no, the only pulse inversion cancels out. Power modulation actually combines to make one double strong wave. The machine then cancels it out so that it can isolate the harmonic frequency. But in and of itself, in power modulation, those two pulses actually combine to become stronger. So only pulse inversion is the one where those two pulses will cancel out. So you notice that in both of these technologies, two pulses are being sent out instead of one. Okay, so two pulses are being sent out. And if you go back to frame rate and temporal resolution, and what affects frame rate and temporal resolution, um, number of pulses affects it. So if you have more pulses, you have to then wait for all pulses to come back and do their job. And that was the key word, right? Wait. You have to wait. And temporal resolution does not want to wait, right? So for tissue harmonics, because you're sending out these double pulses, this is going to degrade or worsen your frame rate or your temporal resolution. Because remember, I tell you that to think of them as being the same. So it's going to worsen them, okay? And use this as a way to connect what happens to your frequency and how it's being done. So the double amount of pulses are being sent out and your frequency is also doubled. Okay. So try to use that as your way to sort of remember that both things, yes, both decrease the frame rate. Yep. So pulse inversion and power modulation all fall under tissue harmonics. Okay. So as soon as you turn on tissue harmonics, it's going to worsen your frame rate and worsen your temporal resolution. Now, the way, whether it's done by pulse inversion or power modulation, that's up to the machine. But tissue harmonics automatically will worsen your frame rate. All right. So try to use that as a way to connect it. You send out double the amount of pulses and you get double the frequency. So whatever your frequency is gets doubled. All right. So that's one way to sort of maybe remember that those two happen. Another thing about tissue harmonics is that it actually helps with grading lobes and side lobes. So you have side lobes and you have grading lobes. So side lobes and grading lobes are actually the same thing. They're just called different names depending on the transducer. If I'm not mistaken, side lobes are for mechanical transducers and grading lobes are for electronic, which is what we use, electronic. But they're the same things, okay? So they're the same sort of artifact, side lobes and grading lobes. They're the same sort of artifact, so don't worry about that. And tissue harmonics, it makes your main beam axis stronger, okay? So, and this is an artifact in chapter 21. So I guess I'll just kind of maybe cover it now a bit. So this is your main beam axis right here. All of this right here that you see is your main beam axis. But the actual wave is actually this whole thing. The size of your crystal, that's the whole wave. Okay. So your wave is actually like this whole thing. But when we draw it or when we explain it, we use this hourglass shape. Okay. And the reason for that being is, I believe it's called Huygens wavelets, I believe it's called. I don't know what chapter it is, but it's Huygens wavelets, which means that each little crystal sends out this Wi-Fi looking shape. Okay, because that's how Wi-Fi looks. So imagine that you have these three crystals next to each other, and they're all sending out this Wi-Fi shape when they vibrate. Okay, and if you notice, you'll notice that in the center, they're overlapping. And as they travel more, they overlap even more. Okay. So they overlap more towards the center. So that essentially starts creating this shape where towards the center is where your beam is getting the strongest. And it comes to a point, which is the focal point, where they overlap the most. And after that point, they start to split apart. And that's why your beam starts getting wider. So that's how you get this hourglass shape. Okay. But if you notice, there are still waves on the sides, right? You see that there are still some waves on the side. It's just that nobody's really interfering with them constructively, so they're not getting stronger. Okay. But nonetheless, that's still a wave that goes out. So when you have side lobes and grading lobes, what happens is that you have this crystal that creates this main beam axis, but nonetheless, there are still some waves going out on the sides. That's why I kind of like the word side lobes, because it's, it's very descriptive. And what ends up happening is these waves normally do not cause any reflections. Okay, so we don't worry about them. But every once in a while, you might have some sort of tissue there. It could be a very high reflecting tissue. And this high reflecting tissue just needs a little bit of a wave to create a reflection. Okay, that's all it needs, just a little bit to create a reflection. And the machine then encounters this dilemma because the machine assumes all reflections are from your main beam axis, only from here. That's where it assumes all reflections come from. So all of a sudden, this reflection comes back, and the machine says, oh, you must be here in my main beam axis. So it duplicates it and moves it towards your main beam axis. When you have tissue harmonics, it makes your main beam even more narrow and stronger. So when you do that, it sort of doesn't really pay attention to anything on the sides. So it's more likely that you're going to ignore anything coming from the sides. And that's why it says that it would reduce the likelihood of side lobes and grading lobes. Okay. You can also do it through subdicing and apodization. So these are two terms that are good to know that they exist and that they're used to eliminate side lobes and grading lobes. Subdicing and apodization. I honestly don't think you need to know how these work, like what subdicing really is, which is when they make the crystals into even smaller pieces and attach a channel to them to have more control over them. I honestly don't think that's the case. And then apodization is when you have a weaker electrical current on the sides, meaning that this crystal is cut into individual crystals, and you say, you know what, my center crystals are going to get the most strength from my electrical current, and my side crystals are going to get a little bit of an electrical current. So you're making them weak to begin with, meaning that whatever goes out is going to be even weaker, right? And that just reduces your chances of getting anything from the sides because you made them so weak to begin with. So it's just good to know these terms exist, okay? So tissue harmonics helps with side lobes and grading lobes. So does subdicing and apodization. I know that you're more like, I know that it might be a good chance that you'll see one of these words pop up in the SPI. Oh, okay. What would side lobes look like? Ah, okay. I hate side lobes. So side lobes. um, Oh, the perfect example is a parasternal long axis of the heart. So in this parasternal long axis of the heart, you have this tissue, and let's say that this is like slanted. You have this tissue right here. This tissue, and let's imagine that this is my image right here. That's my image right here. So this tissue is on the side, right? It's not perfectly down my center. So what ends up happening is that this tissue is a high reflector and it's on the side of the image. So because this tissue is a high reflector, just like how I said, that's one of the criteria being a high reflector, and it's on the side of the image, this is going to create a little extra reflection that the machine is going to assume is going to be right down your main beam axis in the center. So what it does is it takes that little piece that reflected very highly from the side and is going to put it in the center. So it just duplicates it and puts it in the center. So sometimes, like right here, this is the LA, the left atrium. This should be completely anechoic. But if you have a continuation of a tissue there, it's most likely a side lobe artifact that was taken from here and just placed in the main beam axis. It's a little bit tough to see, like to just notice it everywhere. It's a little bit tough. I think I've seen it a few times in echo. I think I've seen more refraction artifact in echo actually, which is crazy because I never thought I would see it. But yeah, so what you're looking for is a little extra piece of reflection that looks exactly like another piece from the side and is placed right down the middle. If you get a question like this and they're asking about this, oh man, it's going to be tough. I would say try to, for me, it would be more of a process of elimination. You know, like if they ask me, hey, what artifact is this? And they start listing all these different artifacts, like let's say they write comet tail as one. Let's say they write shadowing as another. Let's say they write right here side lobes as one. And then my third one, enhancement. I don't know. Let's say they write those as my artifacts. For me, it would be more of a process of elimination. Like I would look for, do I see a comet tail anywhere? Because I know what comet tail looks like. Do I see a shadow anywhere? You know, so for me, it would be more along those lines and picking the one that I know that I'm kind of like, I haven't been able to prove it, right? But I was at least able to prove that it wasn't these other guys. So that's whenever I have to make an educated guess, that's the way I approach it. I say, can I prove what is not the answer? And whatever's left over, well, maybe that's the answer. Okay.
I have an example. That was
Sure.
one of the ones that I actually did get right. That was grading lobes degrade lateral resolution, because it was saying basically that the artifactual echo placement is lateral to the actual structure.
It is side to side. Yeah, it is side to side. Do you know what the other choices were?
I did not write that down. I just kind of eliminated it and wrote down the explanation.
Okay. Yeah, because it is side to side. Now
To
we're
the,
talking about,
yeah,
yeah,
so lateral.
exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's side to
Can you,
side. So
can you say that one more time? I'm sorry. I didn't hear what the question was. What her question was.
yeah. If she can go ahead and repeat it.
Yes, the question on the mock exam that I had was just saying that the grading lobes degrade the lateral resolution. It was just asking what degrades lateral resolution, and the answer was the grading lobes. And it's just saying because the artifactual echo placement is lateral to the actual structure. So if you think of it that way, I mean, of course, like he said, the word side lobes kind of gives it away as well. But the way that they worded it, they just kind of switch it up and try to make you think a little more about it.
Yeah, so anything that affects side by side is going to degrade your lateral resolution. So side lobes are one, refraction artifact is another because it creates a duplicate that's also side by side. So anytime you start hearing side by side, that's going to be your lateral because that's the one that's perpendicular side by side resolution. Alrighty. Okay, so and this is where I tell you about the summaries. So on page 274 in the book, they give you a summary of tissue harmonics. Okay, that right there, it's like what you need to know. So funny story, I was a while ago, I was going through each chapter, and I was doing my own summaries because I figured, you know what? Let me see if I can chop this down even more and I'll just share it with students who take my class, and I'll say, hey, listen, this is the chapter summary. Just read this, and you're good enough with this. And I started doing it for a few chapters. I think it was like the chapters in the teens is where I started doing it. And then I got to chapter 17 and I went page by page, reading it, doing a little summary of each little paragraph. And then I got to page 274 where I saw their summary and it was basically what I was writing. So I was like, oh man, let me just tell students to read that instead. So but you're reading that chapter, that gives you a pretty good idea of what you need to know for tissue harmonics. Okay. Yeah, it tells you that it happens during transmission, which is like they even highlight it. Okay, so that's one of the key things for you to know, that it happens during transmission. And the reason why it's important to know that is because when you look at contrast harmonics happen during reflection. So that could be a very easy little question for them to ask you. Hey, does tissue harmonics happen during transmission or reflection? You know? And it's like, man, that could be very easy if you could remember it, right? So I have no real way of helping you remember it besides two little tips. And they're a little bit of a yoga stretch, but just bear with me. So tissue harmonics is tissues, T for transmission. All right. So it's nothing crazy. All right. But for contrast harmonics, so I scan echo, and in echo we use contrast. Okay. Um, and whenever we use contrast, the image looks a lot prettier. Okay. And I know that images are created by reflections, right? Your image, the only reason why you can see it is because there are reflections coming back into the body. So for me, when I put in contrast, I already know I'm going to get a prettier image, which are all reflections. So for me, it's a little bit easier to remember it because of echo. But if you're scanning, abdomen or OB, you're not using contrast. I mean, sometimes they use contrast in abdomen. They're starting to do it more often, actually. But I don't think, it's a common practice. So it's easier for me to think of it that way because I know that I'm scanning a 400-pound guy, with I'm using both my hands just to try to see a little shaky here, so I can know the heart is at least there. And I'm just waiting for the moment I put in those contrast so that the heart can just look a lot nicer. And, it really just makes a big difference. So that's the way that I try to remember that. Tissues being transmission and contrast just makes my image a lot prettier. So for contrast harmonics, you have the same idea of not this non-linear behavior, the same as the tissue harmonics. Then you have these, uh, like, what are the requirements for bubbles? Because that's what we use, micro bubbles, and they interact with the ultrasound beam. And you have this list on page 278 that tells you the 5 requirements: that they must be safe, they must be small, they must be a strong reflector. If I had to pick whether you should know that or not, I just say put that towards the bottom of your priority list. It's good to know it. You may be asked about it. But again, and I'll stress this time and time again, if you fail, it's not because you didn't know the 5 requirements of, micro bubbles, right? Or even tissue harmonics to begin with, right? If you just know the little bit of things about tissue harmonics and contrast harmonics, that for tissues is doing transmission, is nonlinear, doubles your frequency, uses two pulses, frame rate. For contrast, happens during reflection. You have little micro bubbles in there. It's also nonlinear. If you know those things, that should get you through the contrast questions. Okay. There is a mechanical index here. Okay. Now, I am no expert when it comes to these things, all right? Because I think the more I teach, the more I just focus on the exam. I when I first started teaching, I taught the entire book, page by page. I am pretty sure I am the reason for like depression for some students. I'm pretty sure because I went into detail, page by page, for the entire book. And I soon realized, I soon realized that that should not be it. So then I started sort of slimming and slimming and slimming down what I taught. Okay. But I at least know a little bit about mechanical index, because you also have something called thermal index. So thermal index is temperature. Okay. And this deals with those intensities. So you have the most important one is SPTA. Okay. Spatial peak temporal average. So SPTA is the intensity that you should know for bioeffects. Okay, that's the intensity that you should know. All the other ones, I don't think you have to know them. The highest one, I believe, is SPTP. I think is the highest one, because it's all peaks. P stands for peaks, so the peaks are always the highest, right? And then the lowest one, I think, is SATA, because A stands for averages. So the averages are going to give you the lowest ones. So if I'm not mistaken, this is the highest, and then this is the highest, this is the lowest. But the one that deals with bioeffects, which we focus on, is SPTA. And that's really what you need to know about it. Not that it's spatial peak and temporal average and where does it fall. It's okay. So you have thermal index and mechanical index. So thermal index is that. This is where absorption comes in. You know, that's one of the forms of attenuation, right? The tissue starts to take in the heat of the wave, right? So think of you being cold, and here comes your buddy to try to give you some of their warmth, and you just start robbing them of their warmth, right? And then they have to get away from you. So thermal index deals with the temperature. Mechanical index is mechanical, so it deals more with something physical. So these microbubbles, these contrast microbubbles, are going to expand and contract. And when they do that, that's when they create the reflection. Okay, and that's when we get that reflection, and we get that prettier image. Okay, so that's really all you need to know about that. In page 281, there's like a table that tells you what happens if you have a low MI, which is a mechanical index, versus a high MI. You know, which one is going to give you more bubbles, excuse me, which one's going to give you um, more harmonics, meaning a better image. Okay, so I would just kind of like look over that a little bit, just so that you know where you may want to be. But again, not a priority. I think if you just know the little bullet points, that mechanical index is involved here rather than thermal, I think that's a good place to start.
I think in that chapter with the bubbles, like you said, it discusses like how they expand and how they shrink and
Right.
all that. But you're just saying, just know that as they expand and as they shrink, that's what gives you your nice picture. Do we have to know? And you're saying we don't really need to know too much more about.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I would just pick out the fact that it happens during reflection, the fact
okay.
that it deals with mechanical index, the fact that it's also a nonlinear behavior. You know, that you use microbubbles. I would focus more on like that surface knowledge, okay, rather than going too deep into it. And that's why the chapter is really kind of short when it comes to these harmonics. Imagine they talk about both harmonics in one chapter, and the chapter is only maybe like 12 pages long, and they split it in two. Okay, so yeah, just the basics. Okay, I wouldn't worry too much about it. All right, for chapter 18 now. Now for chapter 18, there's a little bit of more information. Okay, chapter 18 starts talking about hemodynamics. And I know that hemodynamics is a big part of the exam, but it's actually Doppler that's a big part of the exam. Like Doppler is part of hemodynamics, okay? But don't think that chapter 18 is like, oh, this is a big part of the exam. No, it's really the Doppler part. This right here, they just kind of give you an introduction to flows, okay? Because then in chapter 19, we get into the movement of flow, which is Doppler. So it's good to know that plug and parabolic flows are laminar. Okay, and this is considered normal. Then you have turbulent flow. Okay, this is considered abnormal. Right? Generally speaking, it's abnormal. It's not always abnormal, but generally speaking, is abnormal. And turbulent flow is flow that it doesn't have to be going fast. Okay, turbulent flow doesn't have to be going fast. It's just chaotic. Okay, versus laminar flow, it really moves with the herd. Okay, so it's like a herd of sheep that moves together, or flamingos, right? That they all kind of like move their head at the same time. It's like really funny to watch. All right, so laminar is just it's like a very like like a ballet. It just sort of moves together swiftly. That's why when you do a pulse wave, you get this, and then you have your spectral window here. And this is considered laminar flow because all of this right here is actually blood. Okay, it's just like little specks that are bunched together. All right, and those are your red blood cells. So it's just a bunch of little red blood cells on top of each other, and it starts looking like a solid line. Okay, and they all move together. Look, everything moves, everything slows down. So everything speeds up, everything slows down. Everything speeds up, everything slows down. It's just they move together. The blood just moves together. So those are just two forms of like a flock of birds. There you go. Um, the Mighty Ducks. Oh man, that was a movie. Let's do the Flying V. Yeah, yeah. The Mighty Ducks. Oh man, it just triggered the Mighty Ducks movie, like the old school Mighty Ducks movie. All right. So that's plug and parabolic. Okay. Um, so it's normal laminar flow, and it's good to know these terms because they sometimes they give you questions, and they ask you about flow types, and they'll use plug and parabolic in the same as a choice, and they're supposed to mean the same thing, right? So those are not the right answers because they're supposed to mean the same thing, and you cannot have two right answers unless they have the whole, A and B, which does not exist in the SPI, by the way. There is no A and B or C and D. It's this is the answer, and that's it, nothing else. Okay. And then pulsatile flow versus phasic flow. I wouldn't worry too much about that, but these are just definitions. Pulsatile is arterial, phasic is venous. Okay, that's really it. Now Reynolds number. Reynolds number is important to know only because I think it's kind of like a guarantee that you'll be asked about this. And it's just a one question sort of deal, okay, where you have to know what Reynolds number could be laminar and what Reynolds number could be turbulent. If your Reynolds number is less than 1500, you will have laminar flow. And if your Reynolds number is over 2000, you will have turbulent flow. Okay, that's all you need to know about it. Okay, that's all you need to know about it. When is it laminar and when is it turbulent? Okay, so less than 1500, over 2000. So Reynolds number is just used to predict what kind of flow you'll have. But if you get asked a question about this, they will literally just give you choices with different numbers. And they say, hey, your flow is laminar. So what would be Reynolds number per se? And you just find the one that's less than 1500. Okay. Now I understand there's a gap here between 1500 and 2000. I get it. I don't know why. Oh, there you go. Kayla, you were reading my mind. Get out of my mind, girl. Yeah, so I don't know in between. I'm not sure why there's a gap and if it's sort of like a margin of error, I don't know. Maybe I should find Mr. Reynolds and ask him. Or Kayla, if you might do us the honors of finding Mr. Reynolds, please. And not Ryan Reynolds, the actual scientist Reynolds. All right. um, Murmurs. Murmurs, bruits, and thrills. Okay, just be aware that those exist, and they're more related with stenosis, murmurs, bruits, or thrills. So when you have a stenosis, chances are you're going to have a turbulent flow in there, and we're going to get into stenosis in a bit. Now they have these energy gradients, and I remember when I was studying for the SPI, I started looking at these energy gradients and I said, oh my Lord, like, what does this have to do? You know, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Um, so you actually don't really need to know these guys, kinetic energy. I still cover it slightly, but it's crazy that you actually don't need to know these guys. So you have kinetic, you have pressure, which is potential energy, and then you have gravitational, which is also potential energy. So the biggest thing to know about these is that kinetic energy is movement, and these two guys are stationary. So this is what pretty much you have to just know from here. Um, and then the other big thing to know from these guys is their relationship, about the relationship between kinetic energy and pressure energy or potential energy. Okay, the relationship there is pretty much inverse, because look, one of them is energy in movement, the other one is energy when it's not moving, right? So they're pretty much opposites. So when you get to the concept of stenosis, how the book has it, a stenosis is a narrowing. Okay, that is what a stenosis is. Stenosis is a narrowing. That's it, nothing else. You can create a stenosis anywhere. Okay, one example is a water hose. You stick your finger in the water hose to kind of only allow a little bit to come out. You just created a stenosis. Okay, so stenosis can be created anywhere as long as you create a narrowing of something. So when you have a water hose, the water just sort of comes out. And let's say you have it turned all the way up, okay? A lot of water is going to be coming out, but you're not expecting this water to shoot out, right? You just expect it to come out like a lot, but not shooting out. So this is the water. The moment you sort of cover a bit of the end and create a stenosis, then your water does this, right? So you create a stenosis and now your water starts shooting out really quickly. It's the same water, right? It's the same water. You didn't turn it up any higher. The only thing that changed was the opening that you created as stenosis. So it's the same water, but the circumstances change. And because of that change in circumstances, the water behaved differently. Well, what you ended up doing was you ended up changing what energy is being used, whether the kinetic or the pressure. So when you have this water coming out here, okay, this will be considered low kinetic and high pressure, or high potential. And all this is saying is that this water is not moving really fast, but it has the potential to move really fast. Okay. So when you create the stenosis and you have this water shoot out really quickly, now you transfer the energy that was here and you give it to this guy. So when it shoots out really quickly, because you created a stenosis, now you have high kinetic because it's moving really quickly, but you have low pressure, okay, or low potential, because the potential has now been converted into the kinetic. And another example is you becoming a sonographer. If you have somebody look at you and say that you have a really, really big potential inside of you to become an amazing sonographer, right? What are they saying? They're saying that it hasn't come out yet, that you're not at this point an amazing sonographer, but you have the potential to be. So it's stored energy. It's the potential energy inside of you. So it hasn't come out yet. But once it comes out, you no longer have that potential inside of you because it has been brought to life, right? So that energy, that stored potential now becomes who you are, right? And you no longer have it stored inside of you. So it's just like a give and take, right? So that is how this works. So when you have a stenosis, you have blood that's coming here. This blood is now reaching an impasse and it is being narrowed, okay? But this blood doesn't want to back up. It does not. Because if it starts backing up, then the blood that comes before it starts backing up. And then the blood that comes before it starts backing up and backing up and backing up. And man, you could die, what, like in a minute? Because imagine how many times your heart beats and it sends out more blood, right? On average, between 60 to 100 beats per minute. So you don't want anything backing up. So what the hemodynamics, the way that the um, fluids work is, well, if I have a narrowing, I need to move faster so that that blood that would naturally back up gets through, right? Because if everybody goes at the same pace, then they're going to hit this stenosis, this plaque, and they're going to get backed up. But if these guys say, okay, I'll move a little bit faster so that this guy can follow, so that this guy can follow, so that this guy can follow, we all move a little bit faster to get through this, in the same rate, because that's the whole point. The whole point is I want to get this amount of blood through here, almost like if this plaque didn't exist. Okay. That is why your water shoots out, because this amount of water that was coming out still needs to come out in that same amount of rate, in the same rate. So let's say that 1 liter of water, which is very little, let's just say 1 liter of water comes out per minute when I leave the hose open like that. When I block it, I still need 1 liter of water to come out. Okay. My opening is less, right? So how can I achieve 1 liter to come out? Well, I make it shoot out faster to make up for the fact that I have a closing, that I have a stenosis and a narrowing. So that is what happens in stenosis in the body. That same blood needs to make it to the other side in the same rate as if this didn't exist. And the only way to do that is to move faster. Because if I take this away, then this blood slows down. There's no need for me to go faster to try to get through, right? But because there is a narrowing and a stenosis, then I need to sort of adapt and say, okay, how can I get this to get through? How can I get this through there? Almost like if it wasn't there, let me do it faster, 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 faster. So at the point of stenosis, you have your highest velocity. That is your highest kinetic, because kinetic is movement. And because that is high, your pressure drops. Remember, give or take, because pressure is potential. And once you get to the other side of the stenosis, well, then you have an opening, right? So everything sort of can calm down now. It can go back to how it was. So your kinetic becomes less, meaning that you're not as fast anymore. And then that energy that is removed from kinetic is given back to your pressure or to your potential energy. Okay, so this is pretty much the gist of it. I do echo, so we talk about pressure a lot. And I have yet to still master the concept of pressure. And I think it's really interesting, the concept of pressure. But this is pretty much what the book goes into. And that's where Bernoulli's principle comes in, which is the relationship between kinetic and pressure. So this is really what you need to know. At the site of stenosis, you are your fastest. So your pressure is the lowest. And after stenosis, you go back to being slow again. So then your pressure increases. And post stenosis, which is after stenosis, post stenosis, you have turbulent flow. Okay, because your flow came from this one narrowed area, and now it sort of gets split open by your vessel being wide again. So everything just kind of lets loose a little bit. Okay, so once it gets to the other side and that vessel opens up again, it just creates this I'm not sure if it's a pool, but it creates this environment where the blood was at one point going through a small opening, and once it gets to the other side, it just like it just sort of spreads out. And that's what turbulent flow is, when there is blood going in all these different directions at different velocities. Remember, it's supposed to be chaotic, and that's what it means. At the post-stenosis, it gets really chaotic. The book goes into the different forms of energy loss: viscous, frictional, and inertial. Honestly, don't really worry about it. Okay, just read through that. Viscous is how thick the blood is, and if it's thicker, it loses energy more. Okay, that's pretty much it. Um, because thicker things need more energy for them to move, right? So imagine, or they expend more energy as they move, right? So imagine that you are swimming in honey versus swimming in water, right? So you'll probably hit like 10 strokes in honey, and then you'll be tired out. But in water, you can hit 10 strokes and you're fine, right? Because honey is thicker. So for viscous, just have that sort of idea in your mind. Oh, if it's thicker, it expends more energy. My blood will need more energy to move. I'll get tired more quickly, per se. Frictional. Now, frictional, I will discuss, because this is what happens to your sample gate. Frictional energy loss. Frictional energy loss is the reason why we put our sample gates in the center of the vessel. Okay, so remember your spectral window, you have something called spectral broadening. So spectral broadening is when you lose your window, your spectral window. Okay, and it looks like this. Instead of your vessel being, instead of your wave being nice and neat with that spectral window in the center, it gets filled in like this, and that's considered turbulent flow. So you can create this. Okay, you can. I'll talk about it actually in chapter 19. 19? Yeah, in 19 I talk about this. But frictional energy loss is the reason why we put our sample gate in the center of the vessel. In the center of the vessel is where you have the movement of the blood without any frictional loss. Okay, it means, so your sample gate is only going to show you what is able to fit inside that sample gate. Okay, so that's why you can make it big or small. But whatever size it is, it only shows you what's inside that sample gate. Now, there's blood moving on either side. That's true. But that's the reason why it's called a sample gate, right? You're only sampling that area. You're not sampling anything else. So in the center, blood moves without any frictional loss. Okay, there's nothing holding it back. If you were to grab your sample gate and put it up here, okay, now you're looking at the blood up here. And that's okay, you can look at the blood up there. But this blood is rubbing up against the vessel wall. And when it rubs against the vessel wall, that rubbing creates friction. That friction slows you down, okay? So imagine when we walk, we bend our knees so that we raise our feet. Imagine walking without bending your knees and you're just your feet across the floor. You're not going to walk very quickly. You're going to get tired out. You're going to tire out very quickly as well. Okay, so that's frictional loss. So that is why we put our sample gate in the center, because in the center, we're very far away from the walls. There isn't, it's kind of like a freeway. The center is the freeway. It's the center lane in the freeway that's supposed to go fast. Like the left lane can turn to the left, the right lane can turn to the right, but the center one, it just goes straight. So it's supposed to be fast, right? So that is frictional energy loss, and that's the reason why we put our sample gate in the center. So if you put that sample gate close to the vessel wall, you're going to get spectral broadening. Okay, so you create a spectral broadening. Or another example is when you make your sample gate very big. Now you're seeing everything. So you are going to see the fast flow, but you're also going to see the slow flow close to the vessel walls. So your wave might appear bigger because you're seeing this fast flow, but you're still going to have turbulent flow because you're also picking up everything in between, including that frictional energy loss from the vessel walls. And then inertial loss is energy that you lose when you speed up or slow down. So again, don't even worry about it. All right. There's a pressure gradient formula. Pressure gradient equals flow times resistance. Uh, Honestly, I'm not even sure if you should worry about that. I'll put that on my low priority. Low priority. Something that I would just read over in the last minute. Okay, because if you get asked a question about that, it will literally just be one question. So I wouldn't worry about that. And that comes from Ohm's law. So again, no worries. Then they go into the venous hemodynamics and why veins always maintain a low pressure is because they expand and they can get really big to accommodate for the volume of blood. So it's something more for like your knowledge rather than for the exam. Now they go into hydrostatic pressure. Okay, so now it's all about. I think this is more of just a concept for you to understand. The breathing in and breathing out is something that's more on the exam than the idea of hydrostatic pressure. But what they really just want you to know. Oh man, what? No, long body. Come on. Here we go. And then let's draw his little heart. Right there. His heart is not in his arm. I just, gave him a small little chest. So I put it somewhere. Or you can say he wear his heart on his sleeve, right? That's like a very famous saying. Okay. So here's this guy. And hydrostatic pressure is the pressure that fluids exert on themselves. And here's a really fun way to think about it. I had to teach myself this because the book doesn't really go into a lot of detail, right? So I had to watch a couple of videos to understand this. Let's say you have a carton of milk, and because I am vegetarian, even though vegetarians can drink cow milk, I just don't drink cow milk. So it's almond milk, okay? So you have this carton of almond milk. I'm over here like imposing my views on you. All right, here's a carton of almond milk. Now you can puncture a couple of holes in this carton. One here, one in the middle, and one here. Okay, and this is the carton of almond milk is full. So you puncture these holes in 3 different places. The hole at the bottom is going to shoot out your milk. The hole in the center is going to do this to the milk. And then the hole on the top is going to do this to your milk. Okay, so look how very different it is, depending on where I puncture the hole, okay? The reason for that is hydrostatic pressure. It is the pressure that fluid exerts on itself. So if you look at the hole in the bottom, look how much milk is on top. Pretty much the whole carton. And that is just pressing down because liquids have a weight, and then you have gravity pressing down. So liquids have a weight and they're pressing down, and they're pressing down on this little opening here. So once I puncture this, the water finds a way out. And because you have so much pressure pressing down on it, it shoots out because of all that pressure, okay? If you go to the middle, well, now this doesn't count. This milk down here doesn't count because pressure is only coming from what's on top of it, not what's below it. Okay, this right here creates no pressure for this opening in the center. What creates pressure is whatever is on top of it. So now you have less milk on top, so it creates less pressure. So it shoots out, but not as much as the first guy because there's less pressure being exerted on it. And then with the opening on the top, it only has a little bit of milk on top of it, above it. So it's not much pressure, right? So then it's going to leak obviously, but it doesn't leak with any sort of like this high pressured intent, right? It only leaks out because that's what fluids do. They if you give them an opening, they go ahead and leak. So when it comes to blood and hydrostatic pressure, they're basically telling you that if you are standing like this little guy here, if you are standing, where you take the blood pressure matters, okay? Because if you take the blood pressure down here by the knee or the ankle, you have all of this blood pressing down on this vessel down here, on this artery down here, okay? And if you do that, it is going to increase your blood pressure. Now, it will increase the number that you read, okay? So it won't necessarily be like this is your actual blood pressure. It would be an incorrect reading. So the book says that if you take a blood pressure at the um, ankle, is going to add 100 millimeters of mercury. So if your blood pressure is normally, your systolic pressure normally is 120, if you take it at the ankle, it's going to be 120 plus 100. So the reading will be 220. So if you read your blood pressure, it will say 220 over, whatever your diastolic is. And this is like heart attack right here. This is you going straight to the ER, no ifs or buts about it. Okay, this is like serious. But then when you show up, they'll do your blood pressure properly, and they'll say, "Man, you're 120. What do you mean you're 220?" Okay, so that's what they want you to know. If it's so, the rule is if it's below the heart. Okay, so let me just to make it look really nice. And let's get fancy, right? Give me a second. Let's get fancy. Give it a little bit of shading here. Okay. I'm sorry, I just wasted like 10 seconds of your life. So if it's below the heart, okay, you're going to add to your blood pressure because it's adding hydrostatic pressure. Okay, so think of that opening way at the bottom. And I'll spare you, and I'm not going to draw this again. I'll just copy and paste it. There we go. And then if you are above the heart, you're going to subtract from your blood pressure. So instead of your blood pressure, let's say being 120, it will be 120, but subtract whatever it is. So like they give you an example here at the top of the head, you're going to subtract 30 millimeters of mercury. Okay. So if your blood pressure, let's say, was normally 150, right, which is high blood pressure, being at 150, and then you measure it at the top of the head, which I'm not sure how, but let's just say you measure it at the top of the head, that 150 will get subtracted by 30. Okay, and now it's going to say 120. So in your mind, you're going to say, oh, I have regular blood pressure. I'm not high blood pressure anymore. Okay, but that's not the case, right? So they just want you to know above the heart in a standing individual, above the heart, you're going to subtract. Below the heart, you're going to add. Okay. When you are lying down, all right, so I don't know how to draw someone lying down. All right, so just bear with me. Still going to be stick figure, so no magic here. Oh man, how can I take a, okay, let me just color in a little heart. There you go. when, when, you, when you're lying down, doesn't matter. You can take it anywhere. There is no hydrostatic pressure. Everything is pushing down. Okay. Nothing is stacking on top of each other. So you can take the blood pressure anywhere and it will give you the accurate reading. Okay. So that is the the exception to it. When you're lying down, doesn't matter where you take it. Okay. So the best place to take it is at heart level. Because it's supposed to be pretty much as accurate as possible at heart level. So if you're standing, they can take the blood pressure standing. They just have to make sure they take it at heart level. So you always notice that whenever they take your blood pressure, it's always at your forearm because your forearm, excuse me, your biceps, because your biceps is heart level. Okay, so you're sitting down, doesn't matter. They put the cuff around your bicep. That's heart level. That's right next to your heart. Okay, so that's the reason why, because it offers a very accurate reading without anything adding or anything subtracting to it. So that's hydrostatic pressure. And then the last part of chapter 18. So it's a pretty easygoing day today. The last part is breathing, how breathing affects your blood flow. So you can either breathe in or breathe out. And what they want you to know here is what happens to the venous flow and how that affects your heart. Okay, that's all they want you to know. And if you know one, you know the other. Okay, that's basically it. When you breathe in, your diaphragm moves down. Okay, so when you breathe in, your diaphragm moves down. I like to think of this because I'm very, very visual. I like to think of this as your diaphragm being like a bottle cap. Okay, and then you just moved it down. So what's down? Your legs, right? Whoa, whoa, whoa. Why is one of his legs super big? Okay, there you go. So when you breathe in, that diaphragm moves down. Okay, this muscle. And when it moves down, imagine this being like a bottle cap. It just puts this bottle cap on your lower extremities. Okay. So if you can visualize that, you can sort of think about all your venous flow that's trying to come back to your upper extremities, to your chest, your cavity. All of a sudden there's this cap there. So it just stops it. Okay. So it doesn't like stop it, but it slows it down. Okay. So when your diaphragm moves down, it, I believe, do they say stops or let me give me 1 second. I want to see if they say it slows down or if it stops. Venous flow in the legs. So inspiration. You don't have to know about the thoracic pressures or nothing like that. Oh, did I venous return to the leg? Oh, they actually don't say. Oh, it decreases. Okay. They just say that venous flow. So I was right. It doesn't stop. It just slows down. Venous flow in legs decreases. Okay. But for me, this is the visual I have. This blood is coming back and then boom, there's a bottle cap on there that stops it. Okay. So it just kind of like takes a break. So if that takes a break, then something else must be the priority. That something else is your upper body, your upper extremities, your upper body. So your upper extremities, that venous return increases. Okay, it increases and it dumps into your heart. So one slows down. Let me draw the arrows slowing down. One slows down and the other one increases. So they take turns, which is pretty cool. It's pretty cool that your upper and your lower body take turns whenever you breathe in and breathe out. You know, I would have never thought about that. I would have never considered that. So the venous flow in the leg decreases, but the venous flow in the upper body increases. So it's the opposite, right? And heart, the blood that's being dumped into your heart increases. So the heart return, the blood that's being dumped into your heart, heart venous return increases. So all of this is getting dumped into your heart pretty much. Okay. Now there's an explanation about the negative pressure that it creates because now you lower the diaphragm so you have more space in your chest cavity. That more space gets filled in, right? You don't really have to go into that. I think just having that visual of your diaphragm going down, so it's putting a bottle cap on your lower extremities, so then your lower extremities take a break while your upper extremities dump into your body, dump into your chest, into your heart. I think that may be an easier way to think about it. So for breathing in, this is what you need to know. Diaphragm lowers, venous and leg slows down, venous and upper speeds up, or there's more, and then there's more venous return to the heart. When you breathe out, you just apply the opposite. Diaphragm moves up. Now there is an increase venous flow in legs because now it's their turn. So because it's their turn, the upper body venous flow slows down. And then if you talk about the heart, there's going to be a less venous return to heart. Okay. That's all they want you to know. And I'm pretty sure you'll get asked a question about this because it's very, very simple to ask you a question about this. There's a lot of information here, but it's not complicated. So if you were to just pick one side of this, let's say breathing in or breathing out, you can pretty much answer whatever question they throw your way because they can ask you about the diaphragm, they can ask you about the venous return, whether it's in the legs or in the upper body or in the heart, and they can ask you about that for either breathing in or breathing out. So when you just you master one, boom, any question they ask you, you can knock it out. And that's it. So not too bad. This is like the calm before the storm, to be honest. So